Sound like Coach Jefferson sitting down big desk.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Helton. I'm an information security consultant at Humana, and I'm here to talk to you today about mobile telephony, which, unless you're in the telecom industry, most of us are very, very familiar with IP protocols, TCP/IP, that whole stack. A lot of us are very comfortable with it, and we don't know a whole lot about how the telecom business does its business, which it's also network-oriented, very much like IP, but they do things in a very different way. And I'm also going to focus more exactly what out there, you can't really read from the slide, it's kind of dark, but the headline was A Quick Guide to Telling What's Real from What's FUD, Fear, Uncertainty, and Doubt. Everybody knows that acronym probably. Because with the NSA leaks, there's a lot of, spooky stories out there to scare you about law enforcement listening in on your calls, or about hackers decrypting your cell phone calls and stealing things. And I'm here to kind of decipher what's real and what stuff there is just kind of, just scaremongering. So what this talk covers is, it does cover how the cellular telephone system works, but specifically I'm focusing on the GSM family protocols. How it works, and what sort of things you can do to actually attack it, eavesdrop on it, man in the middle of it. I'm not really going to cover app security. I'm not really covering mobile OSs. There's plenty of people doing research in that front, and there was a guy before who was doing how to listen in on Wi-Fi for mobile devices. I think he was right before me. So if that was what you're hoping to cover, we would cover, then or not, you can go ahead and leave and go watch some other guy's presentation. Go watch Adrian Crenshaw's presentation on lockpicking. Okay, so brief history here. A lot of people wonder what all that 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G means. That means generations. So we're talking about the generations of mobile technology. Those generations are determined by the International Telecommunications Union, which is a UN governing body that covers specifically the ITU-R section, which covers radio frequency. So the ITU is a big international standard-setting body, and just like everything else in the UN, you're pretty free to listen or disregard whatever they say. So there's a lot of lying that goes around what's really considered 4G. So first generation was analog telephones. Okay, great big Dynatac brick right there on the top left. The big Gordon Gecko phone, or like Zach Morris in Saved by the Bell. That was an analog transmission system. Basically, the real difference between 0G and 1G is 0G was just basically walkie-talkies, radio telephones. With 1G, you get the whole benefits of the cellular system, is in you get lots of little towers spread around, and you can hand off your call between them. You don't have to stay in the range of just one tower and then lose your signal if you leave the range. You can be handed off. That's the real difference, is that whole cellular concept, which I won't go too deeply into. The big change in 2G was it went digital, because before you had an analog signal, it gets staticky, you would have interference. 2G went to a digital signal. You started encoding it and sending it over the air as bits instead of as an analog signal. That was also when you start to see SMS, text messaging, introduced, and you also start to see the first steps into mobile data. 3G, that's specifically what sets 3G is the ITU's IMT 2000 standard. And that was a standard to get phones up to a certain specification of mobile speed, which I believe it was, I'd have to cheat, but anyway, it was like I think it was, you're expected like I can't remember exactly what the threshold was now, and I don't have my notes in front of me. But it was a certain threshold of mobile data, which was, I think, you're supposed to be able to get like 50 megabits down per second. 4G, what we're going to move into now, the big change there is everything is going data. So before, as you'll see in the later packets, you had a packet switch network and a circuit switch network. Packet switch was for all your data. Circuit switch was the old telephone network. That was where phone calls came through. In 4G, we're moving everything to data. So basically, the cellular telephone network will be one giant voice-over IP network. That's the big change that's coming. And you start to see, if you follow the news and you hear about AT&T and Verizon rolling out VoLTE, Voice over LTE, that's pretty much what that is. You're only going to be touching the old plain telephone system if you're going to go call a landline. If you're going cellular to cellular, it's all VoIP. And here in the United States and around the world, we have really two competing families of standards. We have the GSM family, which AT&T and T-Mobile represent, and you have the CDMA family, which is Verizon and Sprint. I'm really going to focus on the GSM family here today because that's really the global standard, and really it's the one that has won, as you will see. The frequency bands in GSM here in the United States, it's 850 megahertz and 1900 megahertz. In Europe and the rest of the world, it's usually 900 megahertz to around 1800 megahertz. When you talk about quad band global phones, it means it can talk on all four of those frequencies. So any country you go to, you'll be able to hit one of those. The LTE bands are kind of all over the place. to make room for LTE because the radio spectrum is limited. You know, everybody has to have their own frequency. You can't have overlap. Everybody has to have set ranges. What they started doing is once they switched television over from analog to digital, they started carving up all those ranges and selling them off. So they talk about LTE bands, and they'll be numbered. There's currently 1 through 44 right now, and they're all over the place. They're usually like somewhere in the UHF range, so they're a little bit lower than, they're usually like 600 megahertz, 700 megahertz. So they're kind of all over the place, and you kind of run into problems because handset makers have to make different phones to fit whoever bought a certain LTE band. Because Verizon will own a different LTE band than AT&T will, and you got to make your phone antennas all work for that. So it's kind of messy, but most of them will support enough frequencies that you'll get something with LTE. The first member of this family was the GSM standard. Global System for Mobile is what GSM stands for. It's actually a backronym. The original name was like Groupe Spécial Mobile. It was a French group that was trying to come up with the digital telephone standard. That one was really built on the older ISDN protocol. It was like a mobile version of that. ISDN, which a lot of you probably don't know what it is, it was bigger in Europe, because we got a head nod in the back. Somebody knows what it is. ISDN was kind of a stepping stone between analog and digital phone technology. It was really kind of the stepping stone between your dial-up modem and your broadband. It was meant to be that you could send digital signals over the phone lines, and they were supposed to be faster than using a dial-up modem, but they were only maybe about twice as fast. Then DSL came along, and cable modems came along, and nobody gave a crap about ISDN anymore, and it pretty much went the way of the dodo. It was much bigger in Europe and Latin America and some developing countries than it ever was here. The stack that GSM uses is really like a really heavily modified ISDN stack as far as like the telephony protocols it uses to make your call for you. The first data you get in GSM is CSD, circuit switch data, and it was slow. Like you see here, it's like 1.4K. Basically what you were doing is you were using your phone to dial into a modem bank on the telephone's back end, and then it was connected to the internet for you. So atrociously slow. The real jump, the real thing that set digital mobile data off was GPRS, which stands for General Packet Radio Service. And you'll see that come up and up again is because GPRS was the groundwork, and you reuse that acronym a lot. Most people know EDGE, like when they're in a bad connection area and their phone goes to EDGE. That just stands for Evolved Data Rates for GPRS Evolution. It's a really long, drawn-out, nested acronym. But GPRS was the protocol stack that set it, and actually you'll see GPRS really helped the evolution into 3G. And 3G, what we get there is what's known as UMTS, which is Universal Mobile Telephone System. And UMTS has a totally different protocol stack from the older GSM data side. They pretty much throw away all that ISDN stuff, and it actually kind of follows more of a protocol stack that GPRS set, which you'll see in later slides here. So one of the problems with that is that 3G and 2G they can share all their back end with each other, but the front end, the towers, are incompatible. So you had to throw up new towers. So what you'll see out there in the real world is you'll see base stations that'll have hardware for both, or they'll be co-located. You'll see a GSM tower and you'll see a UTRAN or UMTS tower right next to each other, operating still in the same band, supporting those legacy systems. I actually tried to reach out to an AT&T engineer, but they wouldn't give me the time of day because I actually wanted to ask them a little bit about how this really works, because you will see the GSM signals out there and you'll see UMTS signals, but those GSM towers are slowly starting to go away. They're getting more rare and rare. In 3G, the data just progressively got faster and faster. Right now, most of your 3G systems are on HSPA+, which is high-speed packet access. That's what some people try to pass off as 4G, but it's a lie. It doesn't meet the IMT advanced standard, which is the ITU standard for 4G. But like I said, they're UN bodies, so you can pretty much disregard whatever the heck they say, and the marketers did. HSPA is very fast. It doesn't quite meet the mark for as fast as you have to be for the IMT advanced standard. But the big thing is it doesn't have any roadmap to go to VoIP. So that was the big defining factor for 4G was you go all VoIP. ISP Plus can't do that. Although it is very fast if you do have a 3G phone. So moving on to 4G. We hear LTE, that's long-term evolution. Currently you can get 300 megabits per second down and about 75 up. The actual goal to really meet the IMT advanced standard, the 4G standard, is you have to actually get up to 1 gigabit per second down while you're not moving around. It'll allow slower if like you're in a car or driving or something, but if you're stationary, you should be able to actually get gigabit internet down. LTE gets a pass. They get called 4G because they actually have a roadmap to meet that. They're slowly increasing the capability, and they're also able to go all digital and all data for voice. So that's how they kind of get a pass. This is where GSM has won. CDMA, what Verizon and Sprint used, they lost that fight. They had a 4G protocol that was like in a draft version. I believe it was Qualcomm or one of the mobile chip makers actually had come up with some kind of like CDMA version of 4G. It never got off the ground. Sprint gambled on WiMAX and lost, and now they're having to go through the very expensive process of retrofitting everything with LTE. And that's why, if you're a Verizon customer, when you got a 4G phone, all of a sudden you have to have a SIM card, which, was very alien to us, CDMA users, because, I'm a Verizon user. I had to put a SIM card in my, first time I got a 4G phone, which I was like, what the heck's that? And I started reading up, and I was like, oh, okay, so GSM won, pretty much is the story. CDMA lost. Now I'll go a little bit into the anatomy of a handset. So when you get a phone, your phone has a unique identifier, an IMEI. That's the actual unique identifier for the phone itself. It's sort of like the serial number, but it's actually tracked globally. And the purpose is actually to have a unique identifier to be able to mitigate the effects of stolen phones. But the thing is that a lot of people don't take advantage of that, and that's why Apple comes out with like, oh, we can activate, you can lock your phone remotely if it gets stolen. And everybody acts like that's the coolest thing ever, when really the cell phone companies had that capability for a long time, but they just never really pushed it for some reason. You have two processors in your phone. A lot of people, think about their iPhone with an A7 in it, or they think about the Snapdragon processor in their Android phone. That's the application processor. That runs the actual operating system, Android, iOS, Windows Phone, God help you if for some reason you bought one of those. That's for running the little computer in your pocket. There's a totally separate processor that runs the baseband. The baseband is the actual hardware that connects you to the network. It's what operates the antenna. It's what negotiates the channels that you're going to transmit and receive on. It does all that work. Guys I've known in telecom have said, yeah, that's probably going to be like the next big DEF CON presentation, is somebody's going to figure out that, oh yeah, all these baseband processors are sitting around using like code from the 1980s that hasn't never been updated and probably rife with vulnerabilities. So everybody's kind of waiting for that to happen. Now, as a good GSM or 4G LTE customer, you now have a SIM card in your phone. And the SIM card stores some very important things. For one, it stores your IMSI. Your IMSI is your International Mobile Subscriber Identity. It's not your phone number, but it's a unique number that the telephone carrier uses to track you, and it's globally unique. So your IMSI, you're the only one who has it in the whole wide world. It's like the social security number for your telephone account, pretty much. And obviously, with a SIM, your IMSI is transferable, but it's used to track everything on the back end. And actually, because it is sensitive, like I said, it's almost like a social security number for your phone. Usually the IMSI is not transmitted. It's transmitted as infrequently as possible over the network. And a lot of times when you first connect to a tower, you'll send your IMSI one time, and then you'll negotiate a TIMSI, a temporary mobile subscriber identity, and then you use that to identify yourself to the tower for the rest of your session with your call or your data session or whatever you're doing. The other important thing stored on there is the key, which is your encryption key in order to encrypt your voice and data over the network. That's also unique to each subscriber. One copy is stored on the SIM, one copy is stored in the back end of the telephone in their authentication center. It's never transmitted over the air, and that's specifically to address a problem with first-generation phones, was cloning. Back in the day, you could clone over the air because they were just sending this encryption key to negotiate the session first thing. And people figured out, oh, I can use a police scanner, and I can hook up my Commodore 64 with a program, and I can steal people's, unique identifiers on the network, and then I can just take that and plug that into a programmable big brick phone, and then steal somebody's phone, steal all their cell phone minutes, which, it meant a lot back in the day when it was like $300 to, freaking own a cell phone every month. So they mitigated that by making, the key stored on the SIM. So the only way you can clone phones nowadays is you actually have to have the phone. You have to go take it to somebody who will actually rip that data off of the SIM card. There's a little bit of storage space, a very simple file system. Not many people use it anymore, but back in the day you could use it to save text messages and transfer contacts. There are some SIM applications, but that's mostly in third world countries where they're still using older feature phones. Some banks in foreign countries like Nigeria and Guatemala actually will make little apps that run on your SIM card, because your SIM has a tiny little Atmel chip that runs a very, very crippled version of Java called Java Card. And actually, if you look out there, 1 year or 2 years ago, there were a couple of guys, Karsten Knoll, who's a big researcher in mobile, and then another guy presented at TourCamp, all about writing malicious programs to take advantage of Java, the Java card protocol, which has like no authentication. We'll just accept anything you send to it. So lots of nasty stuff there, but that doesn't make such a difference in the first world because we really don't use those apps anymore. Here's an overview of the mobile telephone network, which I realize is hard to see on this little small screen here. To try and orient you, what you basically have here is this is the tower side. So here is GRAN, which is the GSM Edge Radio Access Network. And this is UTRAN, the UMTS Terrestrial Radio Access Network. So that's a GSM collection of towers, and that's a UMTS collection of towers. They both share the same back end. So if you're going to make a call, what's going to happen is, say on the GSM phone, you're going to go to a BTS, a base transceiver station, or it's called a node B in UMTS. They changed all the names, but they all pretty much do the same thing. From there, if it's a phone call, it's going to get routed over here to the core circuit switch network. It's going to hit a media gateway, which those are just for translating protocols between like the landline telephone language and the mobile telephone language that over the air that they use. It's going to go to the mobile switching center. This is the heart of the voice call network. And from there, your mobile switching center is going to route it back out to another tower to talk to someone else on the mobile network if you called them, or take you out to the plain old telephone network out here if you called a landline. Every call gets routed through the MSC, and a lot of people have wondered why it isn't more efficient. Why is it if we're all on the same tower, or if we're on the same collection of towers, all controlled by a base station controller? Why don't they just route it that way? And the answer is, it's so the feds can tap your calls pretty much. Because there's usually only one or two mobile switching centers for like a large metropolitan area, and it just facilitates phone tapping to make it all go to the mobile switching center. So that's the AT&T marketers might give you some story, but really that's the reason why, so law enforcement can tap calls. Now, if you're going to go out and use edge data or use your 3G, your 4G data, it's all going to go down here to the core packet switch network. Oh, you know what? I just realized I've been mousing on the other screen. There. So sorry, there's GRAN, there's UTRAN. That's the core circuit switch network I was talking about, the MSC, the heart of it. So over here is the core packet switch network. So if you're going to connect out and go use the internet on your phone, it's first going to go to a serving GPRS support node. There again, they keep reusing GPRS, the first like real big data technology in mobile. Even though it's no longer GPRS, you're using HTTP A+ or something at this point. You're using something nice and fast. It's going to go to the serving GPRS gateway node, support node. Then it's going to go to a gateway GPRS support node, and then it's going to take you out to the internet. Now the big difference, as I'm sure you know, is that in 4G, that circuit switch network goes away. And there'll be some more hardware added on here to handle your voice calls. Over here are your core network registers. Now this is where just a lot of your data gets stored. So over here, hold on just a second. So over here you have the EIR, which is the Equipment Identity Register. That's actually where they store information about handsets and whether the bills have been paid, whether they've been reported stolen or not. And that is actually a way the carrier has it. If you lose your phone, you can report it to them, and they'll put your information in that blacklist. That if it ever tries to come back on the network, that they won't let it on, or somebody tries to bring it into a store and buy service for it, they'll be flagged as stolen. But for some reason, I don't know if the carriers don't support it as robustly, or if consumers just don't know about it, but people just don't use it. And so that's why, like I said, Apple can come along with their like Find My iPhone remote lock, and everybody thinks that's like they just invented freaking anti-theft technology. Kind of like they put out Apple Pay and they act like they invented NFC, which has been around for like 5 years. So that's that. Then also here, whenever you call in and whenever you first turn on your phone, connect to a network and authenticate yourself and say, hey, I'm Dan Helton and this is my number and I want to make a call, I want to connect to the network. There's some traffic goes on back here. You'll go first to a visiting location register, which they're peppered around all over different places, and they're keeping track of who's coming on. So say my home network's in Louisville, but I'm over in Boston. I'll hit a visiting location register, and it'll just be tracked that, hey, Dan Helton connect to a tower in Boston, and he's made some calls. And it's all tracked for billing purposes. When I first authenticate, I'm going to come all the way back to my home location register. Well, that's usually going to be around the metro area where you first bought your service. So probably for most of us, it'd be one of them here in the Louisville metro area. That's the big database. That'll have all your information. That's also the central, the authoritative source for your identity on the network. Tracks all your billing information, your address, your phone number, what your plan is, all that good stuff. And then there's that authentication center branched off of it. That's where I mentioned the second copy of your encryption key is stored at. So whenever you authenticate to the network, there's some traffic that goes back. You check in with the home location register. There's some crypto goes on between the key on your phone and the key in the authentication center, and you're set up with a session key, and that's your encryption for whether you're doing voice or whether you're doing data. Here's just a brief look at what the 2G protocol stack looks like. Anybody, the guy in the back who actually knows ISDN might recognize LATD, some of these other protocols. Like I said, it's a really heavily modified version of ISDN. Mostly what's going on here, it's, this is the interface between the phone and the towers. So you see MS, which in GSM speak is mobile subscriber, the base station transceiver, the base station controller, and then all the way back to the MSC, that mobile switching center, the heart of the network. So this is kind of most of your error interface and a little bit to the back end. These are very telecom specific, very heavily modified ISDN protocols. And it's mostly, if you mapped it to the OSI model like we all know, it's layer 3 and layer 2 and layer 1. So it maps pretty well to like, you know, the IP layer, like the MAC address layer, and then the physical layer, which is the actual radio transmission in our case. 3G, what 3G actually did was they built a whole other protocol stack for GPRS when they first introduced data to the network. And that was because GSM, that standard was created in the 80s. Nobody was even thinking about trying to, you know, browse the internet from their phone. So it didn't have any services. It was purely circuit switched. So they had to stand up a second protocol stack and bolt a lot of stuff onto the towers to be able to handle that GPRS and edge data to be able to let you, you know, go check sports scores or go watch YouTube videos on your phone. Well, you didn't watch very much YouTube videos back in the day on edge. It would have been pretty slow, but you get what I mean. So this protocol stack came up. So there's kind of a circuit switch side, and there's a packet switch side. What you see here, they have a lot of these similar protocols. And basically what happens is you get, back there on those support node side, IP comes in, and it basically just gets tunneled across these specific protocols. What these are, a lot of these are actually ATM, asynchronous transfer method, which if any of you took Network Plus or took CCNA, those are one of those, that's one of those weird protocols that the telephone company uses that I don't give a crap about, you know, because it's like a WAN protocol. So that's really what most of this stuff is here. You see like L2, L1. MAC, RLC, PDCP, those are actually unique to 3G. PDCP is the Packet Data Convergence Protocol. So it's what basically handles packet data for you and translates it between circuit and packet switch languages for the phone. RLC is the radio link control layer. That's what's negotiating your radio channels for you, saying, okay, you're going to use this frequency to receive, this frequency to transmit, all that low-level detail. And then MAC is the medium access control, not to be confused with media access control like in IP. There's different stuff going on there. But basically, it's just a way to tunnel IP over these wonky little telephone protocols. There's been a lot made of the GSM encryption family, specifically because the older versions are really weak and very easy to crack. Here in 2G, you have really 3 protocols. There's A50, which is plain text, which is nothing. A51 is the one you'll most commonly encounter with GSM. It's a 64-bit stream, and if anybody follows crypto, you know that DES was 64-bit, and they cracked that stuff in like 1999. So there you go, I'm setting your expectations pretty high already, right? A52 was a deliberately weakened version of A51, which this was back in the day when you had those weird like export rules, because crypto was treated the same as like rifles and rocket launchers. Like it had all these, you know, like weapons export laws around it. So this is a deliberately weakened version. You'll never see it anymore. It was thrown out of the GSM standard years ago. You'll see A51 pretty much, and maybe A50. That's actually very common in a lot of countries like India and UAE, different countries that have laws about encryption because they want to be able to snoop on you. Oh, another interesting thing, I think there's a screenshot later. It shows an iPhone warning you that you're on an unencrypted link. If you have a US cell phone, you'll never see that message because the carriers all turned that off because they didn't want people going to India or business trips to China and wondering why their phone's telling them it doesn't have crypto anymore, you know, because the authorities are listening. So even though the GSM standard says on the SIM card you're supposed to flip that bit to yes, warn me if I'm on an unencrypted network, AT&T and T-Mobile, they all turned it off. So yeah, just be mindful of what countries you go to that you might be on an unencrypted line. In 3G, the crypto gets a lot better. A lot of 3G phones you'll see will have UAE1 or UAE2, which they're based on 128-bit ciphers, one called Kasumi, one called Snow 3G. Kasumi has some theoretical vulnerabilities, but nobody's had any practical attacks against it yet. Moving on to 4G, it's getting a lot better. They threw out Kasumi. Snow 3G got ported over as EEA1, which I think that's like the Evolved Encryption Algorithm 1, I think is what that acronym stands for. EEA2 is AES, so finally, telecom's weird, as you'll see. They're very distrustful of like IP and IT related protocols. They always want to use their own stuff. But now they're slowly starting to say that, okay, TCP/IP is here to stay. We might as well start making our backend based on it and not resist it so much. So then they finally said, okay, let's stop commissioning these wonky protocols, AES, what everybody else uses and that we know works. But then, of course, somebody else put out another candidate, EEA3, which uses some weird cipher stream called Zuck that nobody else uses. And it's only a candidate at the moment, and I saw some traffic about potential, theoretical attacks on it, but I haven't heard much about it. Hopefully they'll just stick with AES and just, stop using these weird algorithms. So now, this is the part where the kind of meat and potatoes, what people coming here are going to be interested in. This is our rogue base stations. While you follow the Snowden leaks, you've probably seen a lot of stuff about the NSA's ANT catalog got leaked, and all these nifty spy toys they have to be able to listen to your calls. Or you might have been hearing the news about Stingray. Those are what we call IMSI catchers, or some people call them rogue base stations. It's a fake cell phone tower, and it can do various things depending on how you configure it. IMSI catchers, it's no secret, there's been a lot of press about it. They're used extensively by governments and by LEOs, law enforcement organizations. That's my cool guy acronym today. I've seen a lot of people use that one. So you see LEOs, it's law enforcement organizations. So the FBI, local police, they're buying them up. They're expensive. They're usually $10K is for a small portable model, and most cities are spending $100,000 to $200,000 to buy their equipment. Harris Corporation is the federal government's exclusive vendor. They weaseled their way into some contracts, so any federal organizations like FBI, DOD, they're exclusively going to use Harris products. And that's actually, people talk about Stingrays, that's kind of a genericized term now, but Stingray and Stingray 2 are the specific models that Harris makes of these IMSI catchers. A lot of those details are very secret. They're kept hush-hush. They're buried behind classifications. There's been a few leaks from the NSA. There's been some kind of just inference and intelligence work that journalists have done to just look at purchase orders and product descriptions that cities have had to publish just as part of their public accountability and transparency process. And they've kind of started to piece together what they do, but a lot of the details are kept very hush-hush. And like I mentioned before, the NSA leaks have really shed a lot of light on this too. And the NSA, they have a whole catalog full of crazy James Bond spy toys that you can buy, and a whole section full of nothing but different types of IMSI catchers. Most commonly what you're going to see in Stingrays is they're being used for geolocation. And here's a brief chart that shows how it's done. Basically what happens is the feds get in their black van, they turn on their Stingray with its dish on the top or whatever, and they go drive around a block. And the idea is, say you have a criminal you're trying to locate, or actually a lot of the stuff they use to locate terrorists overseas. They'll drive around with this stuff because they know that Ali Abu, whoever is using some cheap GSM phone in Kandahar, and they're just going to drive around the block and try and find him. So what happens is they're sitting there listening. So a lot of this is you have to know the phone. You have to know that they're on a carrier. You have to know the phone number. So that way you can find out their IMSI. And you can drive around the block and listen for them. And what that does is it simulates a fake tower. It says, hey, I'm a cell phone tower. Come connect to me. And so the phone automatically, totally invisible to us, it's constantly talking back and forth to the towers on the radio control channels. Negotiating, hey, am I going to connect to this tower? Is this tower stronger? Hey, I'm moving in this direction. Do I need to jump off your tower and move to the tower next to me? All this traffic's going on in the background. The IMSI just sits and says, I'm a cell phone tower, and just talks to you, and starts measuring the strength. And so the idea is they drive around the block a couple times. They say, okay, well, I was here, and the signal was negative 60 dBm. I drove over here, it went to negative 50. I dropped over here, it dropped back down to negative 80. And then you start triangulating the location. And apparently these IMSIs, which I would think there would be so many variables, it would make it very hard to accurately locate a person based off a radio signal, just because there's so much potential for interference, whether it's passing through brick walls or, whether it's passing through drywall or wood. But apparently these things are devastatingly accurate. Some of the news stories you've heard is I heard one where law enforcement used it, I think in Florida. A man had broken into a woman's house, he had sexually assaulted her, and he'd stolen her iPhone. And the dumbass ran around carrying it with it turned on, and the cops knew their number, so they're driving around. They were actually so accurate that the guy was hid out in a motel or something, and they knew which room he was in. Didn't have any idea what his name was. All they had was just a very vague description from the victim. But it was so accurate that just running that IMSI catcher around, they were able to say, oh, he's in room 3C. And they busted down the door, and there they finding him, and he's got the phone like in his bag. So, you know, really crazy how accurate these things are. Here's some examples of some other professional IMSI catchers. This is specifically stuff that was leaked from the ANT catalog that the NSA has. Telephony is a GSM rogue base station. And then you have Genesis, which is a covert SIGINT transceiver. What that is, it's hard to see in here. It's actually an old Motorola dumb phone that's got some hacked firmware on it, so you can basically use it as an IMSI catcher listener. And so the idea is you put it in your pocket and you walk around a crowd, like say in a crowded marketplace in Baghdad or somewhere, you're trying to find the bad guy. There you go. You just got it in your pocket and you're receiving the signals and trying to find him. Like I mentioned before, location surveillance is the bread and butter of a lot of these IMSIs. Man-to-mill eavesdropping, it is out there. It's a lot harder, as you'll see. It's especially harder for hackers. So that's where a lot of the FUD comes from, is that hackers are going to have a lot harder time with this. Some of these base stations will be fake base station on the back end, or sorry, on the front end, and on the back end they'll have basically a SIM card in them and a legit transmitter talking to the AT&T network trying to pose as a man in the middle. And there's a lot of problems with that, though. Biggest problem is that you can't keep up the charade forever. Eventually somebody's going to figure out that they're on a weird node because their calls keep dropping from like 3G to 2G. Nobody can call them. They can usually, that box can route your calls out for you, but nobody can call you back in because you're posing as another phone on the network to AT&T while you're playing secret evil tower on the other side. So it's hard to maintain that illusion. There is some stuff you could do, as you see, with crypto, but it's hard to fool the back end. So a lot of this scary stuff about people listening in on your calls, hackers and governments definitely, they have the resources and the ability to do it. Let me say nation-state hackers and law enforcement, they have the ability to do it. Your average cyber criminal, not so much. There's purportedly newer 3G and 4G models, and a lot of places are racing to catch up as the 2G network is fading away. But most of them are exploiting the problems with GSM, the 2G protocol. Specifically, like I mentioned, the crypto is really weak. It's very easy to crack. You can just go totally unencrypted. You can't do that in 3G and 4G. You have to be using encryption. If I'm posing as a fake base station, I can negotiate the session. In 3G and 4G, the base station has to do some things to authenticate itself to you, the caller. On 2G, no, the phone just trusts whoever's I say I'm AT&T, and me, the phone, I'm just going to believe you. I'm not going to ask for any kind of like cryptographic proof of that. You do get that proof in 3G and 4G, but 2G, the handset just tells whatever the tower does. Or sorry, just does whatever the tower tells it to do. So a 2G phone will just drop unencrypted. A 2G phone will route its calls wherever the tower tells it to. So you can exploit that. So what a lot of these IMSI catchers will do, they'll also be jamming legitimate base stations. Because that's another problem is you're constantly competing with all the other cell phone towers in your area when you're trying to capture somebody and play man in the middle. So a lot of them will have radio frequency jammers, and they'll be jamming all the legit base stations in order to make you connect to theirs. So there again, it's very hard to pose as a rogue base station and really fool somebody. Eventually somebody's going to wonder what the hell's up. Their phone's going to be acting really weird. They're going to get suspicious. I'll go over a little bit what hackers can do with IMSI catchers. So a lot of work that has been done on 2G is around AirProbe and Kraken are two programs. AirProbe is a program that you can use different kinds of software-defined radios to be able to sniff the traffic over the air. Kraken is a set of rainbow tables to crack specifically those ones using that weak A51 cipher, the one that's like only 64-bit. It's a great big 2 terabyte rainbow table, but it's very fast. If you go through the work of filling a hard drive with these tables, you can almost crack those phone calls in real time. Hacked handsets, there's been some work on those, taking handsets and using like third-party firmware flashed to them to be able to launch denial of service attacks against the cell phone network. It's never been seen in the real world. It's mostly just Black Hat and DEF CON, proof of concept sort of stuff. But it is out there. There's attacks you could do, like you could kind of do like versions of like the old SynFlood attack. Like you could just constantly be asking to make connections to the network and use up all the tower's frequencies and keep other people from using it. Or you could send fake detach messages, which would spoof from another person's number that keep telling the tower, hey, this guy on this phone, he just hung up, he just turned his phone off, so deactivate all his calls, deactivate all his sessions. And you can do that to like remotely, DOS somebody. Like I said, those are all just mostly hacker proofs of concepts. Nobody's really done them in real life. Most USRPs are very expensive. They run about $1,000 for like a universal software radio peripheral, which is just a great big box that has a nice tuner in it that you can listen to stuff from HF all the way to like extremely high frequencies. It's like for a lot of like ham radio hobbyists use it. GNU Radio is a open source Linux program for playing on a radio frequency. They're pretty expensive, but you can do a lot with them, but the capabilities are limited, like I mentioned before, with how effectively you can spoof a base station. They're pretty good with the right software stack. You can simulate a GSM tower, but you can even set up like PBX software and try to serve calls from it, but you can't keep the illusion up forever. And plus, I mentioned also there's the problem with you just got to start jamming other people if you want to keep them on your tower and keep them talking to you. There has also been some luck hackers have had with hacking home femtocells. And when I talk about femtocells, I'm talking about like network extenders. AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, they all sell those. Basically, if you call up your phone company, you complain, hey, I live in an area with crappy service, I'm about to switch to T-Mobile. They're like, no, here, take one of these home network extenders and you'll get cell phone service. What they are is they're a little base station, and they connect into, usually you hook them into your cable modem, DSL modem, wherever, and they just start routing your calls over the internet back to the back end. And like a lot of stuff, they run Linux or BSD or like little embedded operating systems that never get updates, probably have default passwords for the root account, and so they're a lot of them are trivial to hack. And there's been a couple big stories. Last year's DEF CON, a guy hacked a Verizon cell. This was the first time that the CDMA protocol had actually had a serious, like, man-in-the-middle attack. Over in England and France, a couple GSM carriers had their home network extenders hacked, and hackers were able to put malicious firmware on them that could listen to calls, could do all sorts of nasty stuff. Say, like, if you're trying to call your bank, it routes it to a phishing scam, different stuff like that. They're kind of few and far in between. But they're really about the only avenue people have had into hacking 3G and 4G protocols. Just because that base station itself is a trusted node. And if you push malicious firmware to it, you can still keep up the state of trust. The network, AT&T, T-Mobile, whoever still trusts that node, but you're sitting there with your malicious firmware you push to it, recording all the calls. So now I'm going to switch over to a brief little demo here of the sort of stuff you can do with a rogue base station. Bear with me here while I connect my machine. This is what I want to show you guys. I'm going to show you AirProbe. I don't have $1,000 to spend on a full rogue base station, so you get the budget version of it. But I'll just kind of show you what you can do yourself at home with software-defined radio. That's a really big, hot topic right now. If you follow a lot of hacker stuff, people are really excited about software-defined radios. Basically what happened was somebody found out that you can buy one of these little dongles on Amazon for $30 or less. And what it's meant to be is it's meant to be a TV tuner specifically for European over-the-air digital television. And they use a different protocol than we do. So it won't work here in the United States for watching TV on your computer. But it has a little raw-link RTL chipset in it, this little guy, that people found out it was really trivial to just hack it a little bit and get it to listen to other radio frequencies. And it's got a pretty decent range. It can cover pretty much all the FM spectrum, like all the FM radio stations here in the United States you can listen to on this. And you can also go all the way up to the cell phone frequencies and start listening on them. I'm going to have to be quick about this as we are limited on time. But I will show you a little bit here. Can you see my screen? No, it might not work.
It was up there.
Oh, did I jiggle it loose? There we go. Okay. It's not near my display. Okay. So I'll show you here, whenever you're hunting for it, there's a nice little program. If you're a Windows user, there's some really nice programs. There's one called SDR Sharp is really popular. If you're on Linux or Mac, you're going to have to use GQRX. So I'll show you right here. Oh. I fouled it in. Okay, guys. And the screen is tiny. Alright, actually I'm going to skip this step. I'm just going to skip to showing you what a packet capture looks like. Okay, so here in Wireshark, what I did is I used that STR dongle and I ran a program called AirProbe, which I mentioned before, and it can sniff GSM traffic for you. And what it does is it brings it in, it wraps in a little bit of UDP, so it sends it all to like your local host, like your 127.0.0.1, wrapped in a UDP packet, going to port, what is it? Where's it right here? Yeah, port 4729 is what it's using for this. Now GSM tap, you'll see is the name of the protocol. That's just it's just a fake header, because the real meat and potatoes is down here, where you see the actual GSM information. So most of this stuff, this is actually local. I actually sniffed this off of a local node. Because not many people were making GSM calls, I wasn't able to get any like voice call data. That's also why you jam calls when you're trying to sniff GSM, is because you want them to connect to your tower and drop down to 2G. Because very, very few people are rocking 2G phones nowadays. Most of them, even if they're rocking a crappy Nokia, feature phone, it's running 3G and it's talking on the UMTS protocols and not on the old GSM one. But basically, here you can see some information. Sorry again for this very, very small screen. Let me open it up for my. Oh, here's one interesting packet. I actually managed to capture somebody's IMSI, which is really rare. You can see it here. Like I said, that IMSI usually gets transmitted as infrequently as possible. So there it is. I managed to catch some device connected to the tower and caught its IMSI. That's very rare. That's the first time I've actually seen that one come across the wire. And then here down lower, they issue it a TIMSI. Yeah, right here. TIMSI v TIMSI. So hey, for some reason it rendered as hex. I don't know why. So yeah, there's the TIMSI, that temporary IMSI that it'll use for the rest of the session instead of using its phone social security number to talk to the tower with. I have another file. Hold on here. Never captured. Oh, what are you talking about? You know what it is. All right, some more interesting packets here. Okay, I had another one here, which was an AT&T tower, but I'll show you kind of a neat thing. Like I said, there's no phone calls going on. Most of this is just all this like paging information. It's all like just the beacons that the tower's sending out, telling handsets about itself. Like, hey, I'm a tower, I'm located here. It also sends information about its neighbors, like, oh, hey, if you're moving in this direction, my neighbor, he's on this frequency, and his strength is this. If you need to connect to him, it's really a kind of a noisy protocol. It's constantly sending this information back and forth to potential mobile stations to tell them what's going on. Hey, I lost all the marks. Okay. Well, one thing I wanted to show you was that most of the GSM towers have not been updated in years, and they'll still advertise themselves as singular towers on their carrier identification code. They haven't been updated to show AT&T. But actually, I had marked it before I saved it. I guess it didn't save the little highlights. So anyway, that's all right. Back to the meat, the rest of the presentation here. And if any of you, after this, if you all want to come see it, I can fire up the laptop again and show it to you on a much nicer screen. Okay. Yeah, I got to plug it in here. So.
It was there a second. I think it just.
There we go. Okay. So what's real and what's just FUD? The good news is 2G is going away. It's going away rapidly. Like I said, I've sniffed towers around here. I've never actually managed to get a phone call. I'd probably have better luck if I went and bought a crappy old track phone and made a call myself and sniffed my own phone traffic. It's probably about the only way I'm ever going to get it, because nobody uses 2G phones anymore. Unless you're like, and maybe if I drove out to the boonies where nobody's built a 3G tower ever. But here in an urban area, everybody's got 3G, at least. So they're all using that. GSM's going extinct. All the major carriers have even announced pretty aggressive timetables. I think 2017 is when AT&T said they're going to turn off 2G. Or if you're going to have to, you're going to have to buy a 3G phone or buy a 4G phone. I think Verizon even has a more aggressive timeline for 4G. They want to turn off CDMA and just go all LTE. So they don't even want us to support third generation anymore. They want to just bump straight to fourth and do everything, voice over IP. So that's a good thing. There's really no serious compromise yet with 3G or 4G. And probably if there ever was anything, it would be some kind of crypto. There has been something made about the back end. It's kind of poorly defended. Once you're inside, there's not a lot of encryption going on inside the network. It's usually just all external facing. It's that air interface we talked about, the interface between your phone and the tower. Everything from there is encrypted. Once you come inside the network, it's all sent unencrypted. But that's a problem, in a lot of places. Most of us aren't using SSL internally, That's a pretty standard problem, but nothing serious has been found right now with the way the network is set up on the user side, or with the encryption algorithms, especially since they're moving to AES. Finally, using like big boy encryption, there shouldn't be any problems with it. The threat from criminals is very, very low. You don't really have to worry about some hacker or cyber criminal man in the middle of your phone calls and listening in on them, because like I showed, it's pretty expensive to do it, and there's just not very much payoff, honestly. It's hard to maintain that illusion. It's hard as it is to man in the middle of voice. Man in the middle of data is also pretty difficult because of the same problems you have with encryption. So not a lot of people are doing it. The only group of people you really have to worry about are law enforcement organizations and foreign countries. So if you do business in countries that, like certain Asian countries, I won't name any names, if you do business with them, or if you're in the defense industry, if you run a criminal enterprise, then you might be worried when your phone starts dropping down to the edge, signal loses that 3G and 4G. But otherwise, as a normal consumer, you really don't have that much to fear. So, that said, you can get with me. I can do this presentation. Here's an extensive list of all the resources I used to build this, all the great work that's been done in this space. Here's my contact information, and if anybody has any questions, the floor is open. Nobody? In the back.
Could you comment on whether all of this could be used as a component of a terrorist plot to jam communication, particularly emergency responder communication?
Possibly, but you wouldn't need all this stuff. All you just need is a power amp and just broadcast static on the right frequencies. You wouldn't need to buy a USRP. You could find a power like a 50-watt power amp much cheaper than a USRP. And you get caught pretty quickly, because when you start jamming all the signals, then the FCC starts paying attention.
But it's going to be part of another attack, just a component of it, to slow response. But it could be done to slow and confuse responders.
It'd be pretty easy.
Or on something more secure, is my point, and not attackable.
Yeah, the cell phone system is pretty easy to target, because cell phones have not had a whole lot of frequency to work with. That was actually the whole reason for the cellular model, was so you could, because when you had 0G, when you had one tower serving an entire city, you only had about 12 channels of frequencies to use. So only about 12 people could be on the phone at one time, which 1950, when maybe like one guy in a city could afford one of these phones, wasn't such an issue. But when you get into the 70s and 80s, when you start having car phones become more common, then people are getting pissed off because they're trying to dial, and every time they pick up, all lines are busy, please try again later. And then once they finally came out with cellular technology and that idea of not one big tower but lots of little towers, you could spread that frequency out a lot, over a broader area, and more people could jump on. But same problem, they've only had little slices of the spectrum. Other emergency response, like in the HF, VHF low range, they have a lot bigger channels to work with. It'd be a lot harder to jam those. You need a much more concerted effort to jam like police scanners and like emergency responder radio. Cell phones, definitely. It'd actually be pretty trivial to jam a big wide swath of the cell phone network, but it'd be pretty hard for emergency responders. Jana.
Okay, well, I'm a big fan of TV shows because they're all real, and I am pretty sure that they've got those phones where all they have to do is come by you, and then they planted something on your phone so that they can listen and get all your data.
Well, like I said, I didn't want to talk about mobile vulnerabilities, but one avenue that's been proposed for fake towers is to push fake updates to people. But that's more of it's kind of a network, but it's more of a software vulnerability. Because if I can spoof you in a session and make you think you're connected to a legit tower, I can maybe send you a malicious update. But then again, that's also kind of a convergence path, because I have to have an exploit to be able to use against Android, or a jailbreak exploit to use against iOS to be able to push malicious firmware to you. There's been some proofs of concepts of that very same thing. But yeah, there again, it's difficult. And I don't even know how you'd fool somebody into taking an over-the-air over a slower protocol like GPRS. I don't know, but it's there. People have done proof of concepts of that too. Anybody else? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending.